Okay, well, one of the comments we're looking at today says that like sugar and the stuff they put in processed foods is worse than the problems opioids cause.
Yeah, it's definitely a statement that makes you think.
That's for sure.
Really is.
So we're diving into this chat between Toku, he's got some opinions,
Right.
and Jaggy, who's got a different perspective and some data to back it up.
It's interesting, right? You have Toku, who is maybe reacting a bit more emotionally.
Yeah.
And then you have Jaggy coming in with the receipts, trying to ground the conversation and challenge those assumptions.
Yeah, bringing the facts into it.
Exactly.
And so we're going to break down those arguments and look at the research they cite and then some research they didn't cite.
Right.
To hopefully give you a new way of thinking about corporate responsibility, racial bias, and just like how much control we really have over the choices that we're making.
Yeah. Are we really making choices, or are they being made for us
Exactly.
by, forces outside of ourselves that we're not even aware of?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And so let's jump into it.
Let's do it.
The first topic is the death penalty.
Okay.
Toku says that drug traffickers should get the death penalty automatically.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty strong stance.
It is.
Definitely appeals to that desire for justice, right? Like an eye for an eye kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Definitive justice.
yeah, but Jaggy, he comes back and says,
Yeah?
well, hold on a second.
Right.
The death penalty is flawed. There's a lot of bias in the system.
Right.
It disproportionately affects poor people and minorities.
And the data really backs that up.
It does, yeah.
The deathpenalty.txt source that we have
Right?
says that over 75% of the people who have been executed for murder were in cases where the victim was white.
Wow.
So it really makes you think about, like, who is being served by this system?
Right. Are we talking about fairness and justice?
Yeah, equal justice.
Mutual justice for all, or
Right.
or are we talking about something else entirely?
Yeah.
And it gets even more stark, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at some of the research. Yeah.
In Georgia, for example,
Right.
people convicted of killing white victims
Okay.
are 17 times more likely to be executed than those convicted of killing black victims.
17 times.
17 times.
That's a huge discrepancy.
It is, yeah.
Huge. It's a massive disparity.
Yeah, and also Jaggy brings up the point that innocent people have been executed,
Right. Which is terrifying.
which is really scary.
It is a terrifying thought.
And this source really highlights how important it is
Right.
to have good legal representation, because people who can't afford a lawyer
Yeah.
often end up with really bad representation,
Right.
and that leads to wrongful convictions.
Right.
It contributes.
Yeah. It's a huge contributor to wrongful convictions.
Yeah, so then it brings up this whole ethical question of, is it ever okay to take a life, even if it's the name of justice?
Right. And is the death penalty even an effective deterrent?
Right.
That's another,
Right.
like, does it actually stop crime?
Right, and the research on that is actually kind of mixed.
In the capital punishment and the deterrent source, we can see that experts are divided on whether or not the death penalty is a real deterrent for crime.
So Toku changes the subject and says that we should have more police around as the answer to preventing crime and reducing incarceration.
More police equals less crime.
Yeah.
Makes sense on the surface.
Yeah?
But Jaggy comes in and says, not so fast.
Okay.
And he brings up some really interesting research
Okay.
that shows that just increasing police presence in minority neighborhoods doesn't actually equal less crime.
Okay.
In fact, it often leads to over-policing,
Right.
racial profiling.
Yeah.
And then this just creates this vicious cycle
Yeah.
of mistrust and harm.
So basically it's making it worse, not better.
It can. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And this leads us right into the war on drugs.
Yes, the bigger picture.
Their broader context here.
And how it has impacted society as a whole.
Right, because what we see
Yeah.
is that this campaign, even though it was intended to be colorblind, right, has actually disproportionately impacted communities of color
Yeah.
in a very negative way.
And the war on drugs source, it's a tough read.
It is.
It's really disturbing.
It's a disturbing picture.
What's really important is that we understand how this whole war on drugs mindset
Right.
has crept into so many other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, it's not just about drugs anymore. It's about housing.
Mhm.
It's about jobs, healthcare,
Right.
child welfare. All of these things are affected by policies
Right.
that really stem from this war on drugs approach.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
the source talks about one-strike eviction laws,
Right.
where people can be kicked out of public housing
Right.
just because someone suspects them of using drugs.
Yeah, just suspicion.
No arrest.
Right, just suspicion.
No charges, nothing.
It's enough.
Just a suspicion.
Yeah, and
Imagine
that's
living under that kind of fear
constantly.
that you could lose your housing just because someone suspects something.
Yeah, it creates a culture of fear, and it really limits people's opportunities.
Yeah. Yet this war on drugs has really created barriers
Yes.
to opportunity, to basic necessities,
Absolutely.
and it's really targeting communities of color.
Absolutely.
It's a really disturbing trend that we see.
And here's a statistic that just blew my mind
Okay.
from the war on drugs source. Despite all of the money we're spending on drug enforcement, drug use in the U.S. is actually going up.
It's not working.
So is it working?
Right.
Is it actually making us safe?
It's making things worse.
Yeah, or is it just causing more problems?
Yeah.
And that's a question that Jaggy really highlights, and it relates to this concept of necropolitical expansion,
Okay.
which basically means that the war on drugs has become a way to control and exploit certain communities.
Okay.
It's not just about stopping drug use anymore. It's about power.
Yeah.
It's about control. It's about who gets to succeed.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Jaggy says that corporations
Okay.
like Nestle, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's
Right.
cause more harm to society
Right.
than drug traffickers.
That's a big statement.
That's a huge statement.
Bold.
Of course, Toku disagrees,
Right.
right? He thinks corporations are just providing products.
Right. Freedom of choice. Right.
Yeah, you can choose.
Consumers can choose what they buy.
Yeah.
But Jaggy, he's got receipts here. He's got a ton of examples.
Let's go through them.
Yeah, let's break it down.
Okay, so Nestle.
Okay.
Nestle was paying doctors to push formula over breastfeeding,
Wow.
especially in developing countries.
Especially in developing countries, yeah. So the consequences of that are pretty huge.
Yeah, because formula is expensive.
Right. And then it can lead to health problems for babies, right? Like
Yeah.
infections,
Right.
malnutrition.
So it puts a strain on these families
Huge strain on families.
who are already struggling.
Exactly. So it's really a corporation
Yeah.
putting profits before people's well-being,
Exploiting people.
exploiting vulnerable populations to make money.
And then we have Coca-Cola.
Okay.
They funded research that was basically saying that sugar doesn't make you fat.
Wow.
They were downplaying the role of sugary drinks
Interesting.
in obesity.
Yeah. So
And they were pushing this through medical journals, conferences.
they're manipulating scientific information to protect their profits.
Yeah.
Wow.
What do you think about that?
I mean, it's pretty disturbing.
It's
They're
really
shifting the blame onto
Yeah.
individuals like, oh, you're not exercising enough.
Right.
When really their products are contributing to this public health crisis.
It's corporate spin at its finest.
It is, yeah.
So not only that,
Yeah.
but the source, cola.txt, says that they've been accused of polluting water
Wow.
and contributing to water scarcity
Okay.
and communities that don't have a lot of access to clean water to begin with.
That's a big problem.
Yeah, so it's a pattern of just complete disregard
Right.
for the environment,
Yeah.
for the people.
And for the people who are most affected
Yeah.
by their actions.
And then finally we have,
McDonald's, the Golden Arches.
they're accused of exploiting their workers,
Okay.
paying poverty wages, denying benefits.
Yeah. Creating a culture of disrespect.
The MCD.txt source is basically saying that they put their bottom line above all else.
Yeah, it's all about profit.
Yeah.
No matter the cost.
Human cost, anything.
Yeah, regardless of the human cost.
Yeah, and it says that 84% of McDonald's workers in New York City were paid less than they were supposed to be paid.
84%.
84%.
It's a huge number.
And in 2019, they had to pay $26 million to settle a lawsuit
Wow.
with California employees who said they were denied overtime and breaks.
Right, so it's like they're systematically stealing from their workers.
Yeah, it's wage theft.
Yeah, wage theft.
And it's a huge problem
It is.
in a lot of these low-wage industries.
And what makes it worse
Yeah.
is that while the employees are struggling to get by, the executives are raking in huge profits, and they're using all kinds of schemes to avoid paying taxes.
Yeah, the source mentions that France is going after them for $341 million in back taxes.
Wow.
Similar accusations in the UK.
So it's estimated that they're dodging maybe as much as $1.8 billion in taxes globally.
Globally.
Think about what that money could do
Yeah.
if it was actually being used for public services.
Schools, healthcare.
Yeah, schools, healthcare, infrastructure, things that benefit everyone.
Right. It's just a blatant example of corporate greed.
It is, yes.
And it really underscores the need for stronger regulations
Absolutely.
and tougher enforcement.
Yeah, we need to hold these companies accountable.
And let's not forget about the food.
Right, the food itself.
What do you think about the food?
I mean, fast food?
Yeah.
It's loaded with sugar, salt, fat,
Right.
all kinds of processed ingredients.
That contribute to so many health problems.
Heart disease, diabetes, you name it.
Yeah, it's like they're getting us addicted to this food.
It is addictive.
That's slowly killing us.
And they're masters at marketing to children. So they're creating lifelong customers
Right.
who are then more likely to have all these health problems later in life.
So it's this vicious cycle
It is.
of exploitation and profit making
At the expense of our well-being.
at the expense of our health.
Exactly.
And this comes back to the question of choice, right?
Right.
Like Toku says people can choose what they want to buy.
Yeah.
But is it really that simple?
I mean, think about it. We're bombarded with advertising constantly.
Right.
Unhealthy food is cheaper.
Yeah.
It's more convenient. It's easier to get.
Everywhere.
Yeah, our neighborhoods are saturated with fast food restaurants.
So are we really making free and informed choices?
Right. It's a tough question.
It's a really complicated issue.
It is.
And I think we have to acknowledge that we do have some responsibility.
Sure, we can't just blame corporations for everything.
Yeah, we can't just like abdicate all responsibility.
Right.
But at the same time, we can't ignore the fact that these companies are shaping our environment and our choices
They are influencing our choices.
in a very deliberate way.
Absolutely.
So how do we challenge these systems?
Yeah.
How do we create a world that's more just and fair?
Well, I think Jaggy offers some solutions.
Okay.
He's not just pointing out problems, he's actually giving us some concrete things that we can do.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, he talks about the importance of community organizing,
Okay.
collective action, right? Holding corporations accountable through boycotts, protests, even legal challenges.
Yeah.
He also emphasizes the need for systemic change,
Okay.
like stricter regulations, progressive taxation,
Okay.
investing in public services that benefit everyone.
Right. Not just the wealthy elite.
Exactly.
So we're talking about policies that create a more level playing field,
Right. Address the root causes of inequality.
not just putting Band-Aids on things.
Exactly. And this goes back to what we were talking about with the death penalty,
Yeah.
the war on drugs, right? Those policies, they're not just ineffective,
Yeah.
they're unjust. And they disproportionately harm communities of color.
Yeah.
So Jaggy is urging us to move away from punishment
Okay.
and embrace solutions that focus on rehabilitation,
Okay.
reducing harm,
Yeah.
and achieving social justice.
So true safety comes from investing in our communities
Exactly.
and making sure everyone has access to what they need
Yeah.
to thrive.
Not for more police and prisons.
That really resonates with me.
Yeah, it's about creating a world where everyone feels safe,
Yeah.
valued, respected, no matter their background,
No matter their race.
no matter their socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
We're all interconnected, and the choices we make,
Right.
both individually and as a society, have a ripple effect.
As we move into the next part of this conversation, I want you to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Think about the choices that you make every day.
Every day, yeah.
What are you buying?
Yeah, what are you buying?
Where are you spending your money?
Where are you putting your energy?
What causes do you support?
Right.
What policies do you advocate for?
What kind of world do you want to live in?
Even the smallest actions
Yeah,
can make a difference.
absolutely.
We have the power to change the system and create a world
Yes.
where corporations are accountable,
yeah.
where racial justice prevails,
Yeah.
and where everyone has a chance to live a healthy
Yes.
and fulfilling life.
It starts with each of us.
It all starts with,
Recognizing our own power and choosing to use it for good.
yes,
So let's dive into the next part
let's do it.
and see what else Jaggy has to say.
Okay,
Well-
welcome back.
So we're going to pick up where we left off talking about McDonald's.
Yeah, let's dig a little deeper into that, this whole concept of corporate culpability, right?
Yeah, because their practices raise a lot of questions.
Yeah, there are some real red flags.
Yeah, and the source that we have, the mcd.txt, it keeps pointing to this pattern of profit over everything else.
Right, the bottom line, that's all they care about.
Yeah, even if it means squeezing their workers and customers for everything they've got. Right, I mean, think about the power dynamics here.
Yeah.
You have this massive global corporation like McDonald's,
Yeah.
and they have so much power over their employees,
Yeah.
many of whom are in really vulnerable positions.
They don't really have a lot of options.
Exactly.
Right, they need the jobs.
They need the work.
And the source actually says that something like 84% of McDonald's workers in New York City were being paid less than they were legally entitled to.
84%? Wow, that's a shocking number.
Yeah, and in 2019, they had to pay $26 million to settle a lawsuit
Wow.
with California employees who said they were denied overtime pay and proper breaks.
It's wage theft,
It is.
and it's a huge problem.
Yeah, especially in these low-wage industries.
Like they're systematically stealing from their own employees.
Denying them fair compensation for the work that they're doing.
Exactly. And meanwhile,
Yeah.
the executives are getting richer and richer.
They're using all these fancy schemes to avoid paying their taxes.
Right. The source mentions that France is going after them for $341 million.
Yeah, in back taxes.
And the UK has similar accusations.
Globally.
Globally, it's estimated they could be avoiding as much as $1.8 billion in taxes.
That's a lot of money.
Think about what that money could do.
Yeah, if it was actually used for public services, schools, healthcare.
Infrastructure, all of the things that benefit everyone.
Right, it just highlights this corporate greed.
It does.
And the need for stronger regulations and tougher enforcement.
We need to hold these companies accountable.
Absolutely. And then there's the food itself.
Right, the food itself.
It's not exactly health food, is it?
I mean, fast food in general.
Yeah.
It's loaded with sugar, salt, saturated fat, all of those things that contribute to obesity, heart disease, diabetes.
It's like they're hooking us on this food.
Yeah, it's designed to be addictive.
That's slowly making us sick.
And they're marketing it to kids.
Yes.
So they're creating lifelong customers who are then more likely to develop these health problems later on.
It's this vicious cycle of exploitation.
It is.
And they're making a profit at the expense of our health.
Exactly. And it goes back to this question of choice, right?
Yeah, right. Because Toku says we have a choice in what we buy.
Right. We have freedom of choice.
But is it really that simple?
I mean, think about it. We're surrounded by advertising.
We're bombarded with it constantly.
Constantly.
Unhealthy food is cheaper and easier to get than healthy food.
Absolutely. Our neighborhoods are filled with fast food restaurants.
So are we really making free and informed choices?
It's a good question.
It's a complicated issue.
It's complex.
And I think we need to acknowledge that we do have some personal responsibility.
Sure, we can't just blame corporations for everything.
But we also can't ignore the fact that these corporations are shaping our environment and our choices in a very real way.
Absolutely. They are influencing us whether we realize it or not.
So what can we do about it? How do we challenge these systems? How do we create a world that's more just and fair?
Well, Jaggy gives us some ideas.
Okay.
He's not just complaining, he's offering solutions.
Okay, like what?
Well, he talks about the importance of community organizing,
Yeah.
taking collective action,
Okay.
holding corporations accountable through boycotts, protests, even legal action.
Okay.
He also talks about the need for systemic change.
Okay, so not just individual actions, but changing the system itself.
Exactly. Things like stricter regulations, progressive taxation, investing in public services that benefit everyone, not just the wealthy.
Right, so we're talking about policies that create a more level playing field.
Exactly. Addressing the root causes of inequality rather than just trying to fix the symptoms.
And this connects to our earlier conversations about the death penalty and the war on drugs.
Right. Jaggy argues that those policies are ineffective and unjust.
And they disproportionately harm communities of color.
Exactly. They trap people in a cycle of poverty and incarceration.
So he's saying we need to move away from punishment and towards solutions that focus on rehabilitation, reducing harm, and achieving social justice.
Exactly. True safety comes from investing in communities and making sure everyone has what they need to thrive.
Not from building more prisons.
Exactly.
That really resonates with me.
Yeah, it's about creating a world where everyone feels safe, valued, respected, no matter their background.
Regardless of their race, their socioeconomic status, where they come from.
We're all interconnected.
We are.
And the choices we make, both individually and as a society, they have a ripple effect.
They do.
So as we move into the last part of this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want you to think about that. Think about the choices that you make every day.
The things we buy, where we spend our money, what we support.
What we advocate for, what kind of world do we want to live in?
And remember that even small actions can make a difference.
Absolutely. We have the power to change things.
We do.
We can create a world where corporations are held accountable, where racial justice prevails, and where everyone has a chance to live a healthy and fulfilling life.
It all starts with us.
It starts with recognizing our own power and choosing to use it for good.
So we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff. Death penalty, war on drugs, corporate responsibility, racial bias, and it can all feel kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it's easy to feel like these systems are so big, so powerful, what can we even do?
Right, exact.
But Jaggy reminds us that we're not powerless.
Okay, so what does he say we should do?
Well, first of all, he says it's really important to understand how these systems work, how they're all connected, how they influence our lives, and then we can start to think about how to disrupt them.
Okay, so we need to understand the problem before we can solve it.
Exactly. He uses this interesting example of how Asian communities have achieved a lot of financial success.
Right.
And he argues it's not because of some kind of inherent cultural superiority.
Which is something that some people say.
Right. But he says it's actually because of historical context and Western investment.
So it's more complicated than just saying one group is better than another.
Right. It's about looking at the bigger picture, understanding the historical, economic, and social forces that are at play.
And this connects back to his point about the systemic disadvantages faced by Black and Latinx communities.
Absolutely. He's saying that not everyone starts from the same place.
Right. Some groups have been denied opportunities and resources for generations.
Exactly. And we need to acknowledge that reality.
He also has this interesting point about China.
Okay.
Toku says that China is the biggest market on the planet.
Right, which is a common perception.
But Jaggy pushes back on that.
How so?
He says that China's growth has been driven by exports, not by people in China buying lots of stuff.
So their biggest customers aren't actually in China.
Exactly, he says. Their biggest customers are not locals.
So it's a different picture than what we often hear.
Right. It's not this self-sufficient booming economy.
It highlights how interconnected global markets are.
And that some countries are much more dependent on others.
Exactly. And this brings us to the core of Jaggy's argument, which is the need for systemic change.
So we're talking about big changes.
Yeah, not just individual actions, but changing the way our society is structured.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, he talks about progressive taxation, where the wealthy pay a higher percentage of their income in taxes
Okay.
to fund things like education, healthcare, infrastructure, things that benefit everyone.
Right, so the idea is that those who can afford to contribute more should contribute more.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of investing in public services,
Right, so things like schools, hospitals, roads, transportation.
things that make a society function well and create opportunities for everyone.
And this all connects back to our discussions about the death penalty and the war on drugs,
Right, those are policies that he sees as ineffective and unjust.
and that they disproportionately impact communities of color.
Exactly, and he's urging us to move away from those kinds of punitive approaches.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
He's advocating for solutions that focus on rehabilitation, harm reduction, and social justice.
So instead of punishing people,
Yeah.
we should be helping them.
Exactly, and he believes that true safety and security come from investing in our communities and making sure everyone has what they need to thrive.
Not from more police and prisons.
Right, it's a different way of thinking about how to create a just and equitable society.
It is. It's a really powerful vision.
It is, and as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a few key takeaways.
Okay, I'm listening.
First, remember that systems have power. We're all operating within these structures, and we need to understand how they work so we can change them.
So knowledge is power.
Exactly.
Okay.
What else? Second, history matters. We can't just ignore the past. We need to acknowledge the legacies of slavery, colonialism, discrimination, and work to repair the harm that's been done.
Right. The past shapes the present.
Absolutely. And finally, embrace the power of collective action. No one can change the world alone. We need to join forces, build coalitions, and work together to demand justice and equity.
So get involved, make your voice heard, fight for what you believe in.
Exactly. That's what makes a deep dive truly worthwhile. It empowers us to question, learn, and take action.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.